Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining us today as we host this webinar to introduce you a little bit more to the role that the Regional Resource Hub can play in biodiversity monitoring in the region. As Fernanda said, my name is Christine Menzel, and I am the coordinator of the BIOPAMA program for the Eastern and Southern Africa region. It gives me great pleasure today to welcome all of you to this webinar. And I hope that we are able to share good information with you and also engage with you at the end of the presentations on your questions with regards to monitoring and the role that the RRH can play in this. So this webinar is hosted by the Biodiversity and Protected Areas Program, BIOPAMA, which is an initiative of the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, funded by the 11th European Development Fund. And BIOPAMA has been active in this region for almost 10 years. It's a global program, but that's been active for 10 years. And in this region in particular, I have been working for quite some time, or managing the program in this region for quite some time. And the focus is really to aim to improve management and governance in protected and conserved areas across the region through three main pillars or focus areas. One is what we're talking about today, which is the development of a regional observatory, or in our case called the Regional Resource Hub, which collates, analyzes, and provides data and information on the status and progress of management and governance of protected and conserved areas. The second pillar is around training, and that's both on the data and information management side, but also on assessing progress, assessment tools, as well as then also just technical skills around effective management and governance. And then the third pillar is action on the ground, which is through the BIOPAMA action component, and is essentially a granting mechanism through which we support protected areas to action some of the priorities that they have identified to move them along towards more fair and effective management of their areas. So collectively, these three pillars combine to make tangible progress in supporting countries in achieving fair and effective protected and conserved areas. So today, as I said, we'll be focusing on the Regional Resource Hub and the monitoring component in particular of the global biodiversity framework, the post-2020 biodiversity framework. Previously, the RRH also focused on the Aichi targets, but at the moment this year, we are ends in the culmination of negotiations around the new set of targets. And so the Regional Resource Hub can play a role in supporting the monitoring that will be required to report against those targets as well. We have collected a few speakers today for you to speak about this, about the current process of negotiations around the new global targets, as well as then also outlining the role of the Regional Resource Hub and its host institution in the region, and then also how the regional observatories, of which the RRH is one, are working to support countries to report on progress. So I'll just quickly run through the agenda and then we can get going. Next slide, please, Fernanda. So this is the agenda that we have for today. Introduction is, of course, what I'm busy with at the moment. And then our first presenter is from the Convention of Biological Diversity Secretariat. Mr. Eri Tamala is the head of capacity building and knowledge management, and will be speaking to the process of target development and the overall theory of change that countries are aiming to achieve to ensure biodiversity is sufficiently protected. So he'll be kicking us off. And then we will move on to two colleagues from the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, RCMRD. RCMRD is the host institution for the Regional Resource Hub, which is the regional observatory for biodiversity and protected areas in this region, in the Eastern and Southern African region. So we'll start with Dr. Emmanuel Nkurunziza, who is the Director General, and will provide a short overview of RCMRD's vision and also the role in the region they already have, and how then the RRH fits into that. And then we'll be moving on to Ngugi Kimani, who is the lead on RCMRD side for the RRH, and who will provide an overview of what the RRH offers the region at the moment. And finally, we will hear from Trevor Sandwith, the director of the IUCN Center for Conservation Action, who will link the role of the regional observatories, of which the RRH is one, to the monitoring of the post-2020 targets. And then after the presentations, we will have time to answer your questions. And as you will have noticed, this is a webinar format, so you are likely only able to access the Q&A section of the webinar. So we would request that as we move through the presentations, that you put your questions into the Q&A section of the webinar, and we will pick these up, either respond to them in writing or then pick them up in the Q&A section after the presentation. So please feel free, as you think of a question, please just pop them into the Q&A, and we will try and get to them either in written form or then at the end after the presentations, we will deal with them. I hope that all of you heard the instructions around translation services. We do have translation services in French and in Portuguese today. So if you are more comfortable listening in one of those languages, please click on the globe that you see on the bottom of your screen and select the language of your choice. And I think without further ado, I'm going to just check if we are ready to start with Mr. Tamal. Just see. There we go. Hello, Mr. Tamal. So we will start with your presentation, and we will run that from our side here, and you are very welcome to just let us know when you need us to move the slide.
Sure.
Welcome, and thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good morning. Well, it's good morning here. I guess you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So I'm happy to join this event, and thank you for organizing this. I like, from behalf of the Executive Secretary, to commend you on the work you are doing, which is very timely as we get closer to hopefully adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in December. So all this preparatory work is most welcome, and we are happy to join hands with you. So I was asked to talk briefly about the draft framework, where we are at, but also I'll make reference to some of the relevant COP decisions that will be adopting elements for means of implementation to support the post-2020 framework. So I will highlight a few of those decisions in my presentation. Next slide. So the post-2020 process has been quite long. As you all know, we started off from shortly after the COP adopted, the COP14 adopted the decision in 2018. We started shortly after in 2019 with the regional consultations and a number of global events and consultations. And it's been a long journey. COVID-19 didn't help the situation. However, maybe it's a blessing in disguise at the same time to be able to come up with a framework that has gone through extensive consultation. Despite COVID, we had the process going virtually, and we are at the tail end right now, where we hope that at COP15 we'll be able to adopt. However, we are so close, but not so close at the same time. As you are, some of you are aware, this the framework, the last process was in Nairobi, and what we have is still a draft that has so many square brackets. Actually, my boss counted and was reporting that we have 1,800 plus square brackets. is quite not a pleasant situation to be in when we are only a couple of weeks to go to COP15. But at the same time, we have to be optimistic and hopeful that we'll be able to get it done in December. And next slide. So we are, there's a roadmap from Nairobi. A roadmap was developed to try to help complete the process of negotiation. And we just completed part of that roadmap. We had a meeting of the informal group on the post 2020, which met from the 26th to the 30th of September, and it was informal. So the discussions of the group were basically not. It was not a negotiation. It was just an effort, technical review of the draft, and look for opportunities where the text could be streamlined and remove any redundancies and make it more coherent. From our assessment, I think the informal group did a good job, and what they've come up, if it's agreed by the next meeting of the open-ended working group, I think will help to move the process forward. But there will be webinars and online meetings to sort of socialize these new recommendations from this informal group. So you'll be hearing more from the secretariat and from the co-chairs. So once this this draft is shared, the next meeting of the open working group will take place from the 3rd to the 5th of December. And we hope if the recommendations from the work group are adopted, then that will help us to spring us forward into getting the final draft submitted to COP15 for adoption. Next slide. So I don't know whether you are familiar with the theory of change that has been developed by the co-chairs or developed by the open working group. This is the move, it's not the final. It's, I think in Nairobi, there was new suggestions that came forward, but the overall structure will still remain the same. Looking at one side where we are coming from, the drivers that are leading to loss of biodiversity, the current status, so, and then going into, hopefully, if these targets are adopted, will lead us to the desired state by 2030, going into 2040, and eventually to 2050 to realize the vision. So that's the theory. But of course, how that would unfold will have a number of need a lot of effort, including exactly what you are doing in terms of facilitating this the implementation, but also facilitating the monitoring and reporting of the progress being made and making adjustments to make sure that we don't miss the targets by 2030, but also the milestones to 2040 and eventually to the reaching the vision by 2050. So it's a complex diagram. I don't think I'm going to describe it at this stage, but you'll have a copy of the presentation and you can run through. But as I said, with a caveat that this might change at the next meeting of the open-ended working group. Next slide. So basically, the negotiations are, if you may, around 3 pillars that forming the part of the core process of negotiation. On one hand, you have the goals and the targets, which are that's the main thing. That's what we want to be able to achieve by 2030, and also going to 2050 to realize the vision. So there is that aspect where the parties are negotiating the specifics of what these goals and the targets will be. On the other hand, you have the means of implementation, we know very well they're equally important, because you might set the most ambitious goals and the most well-crafted goals and targets, but if the means of implementation are not commensurate to the ambition, then we will not succeed. On the third leg is the accountability and the transparency, the monitoring, the reporting, and the review of the efforts being made to achieve the targets, and also tracking whether the means of implementation are available to support that process. So these are, if I may, these are the kind of the three pillars that are forming the biggest part of what the negotiations are about. And they are equally important, I must emphasize. In the past, there was a tendency to focus more on the goals and the targets and make sure they are perfect. But in the end, we know we never achieved the issue targets, not because they were not good, they were really good, but the other aspects were missing. And we will, this time, the process to make sure that these aspects are given equal attention and equal importance in order for us to be able eventually to realize the mission and the vision of the post-2020 framework. The next slide. So I will not get into the specifics of what the goals and the targets are, because as I mentioned, really, as a secretariat person, I wouldn't even attempt to say this is now the text of the targets. However, we, as you know, for some of you, we have right now 22 targets that we are working towards, and perhaps the 23rd one might also be accepted finally. These will form the core of the concrete actions that need to be taken to be able to achieve the post-2020. I mean, the 2020 vision and mission. And as I said, on the other hand, we have the enabling conditions and the means of implementation. These include capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, partnerships, and then the other angle that I mentioned earlier is the monitoring, reporting, and the review. Another key aspect is that, and this has been emphasized over and over, that we need to make sure that the post-2020 effort is well aligned with the other global processes and agendas. And this includes alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals, alignment with the Paris Agreement, and many other global processes that are ongoing, to make sure that they talk to each other. On the ground, when you go on the ground, you can never separate these. For the stakeholders on the ground, they are one and the same, and they influence each other. So there's effort to make sure that these are properly aligned, and the outreach on the ground is supporting these processes, supporting each other. The next slide. So I've talked about the framework and the process. However, under the entire process, you have these other processes under the CBD that have been supporting the post-2020 framework. On one hand, you have the subsidiary body on implementation, which is the SBI. Which is more looking at mostly the means of implementation that will support the post-2020 framework. And on the other hand, you have the scientific body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, which has been looking at the targets and looking at these targets and making advice from a scientific and technical point of view to make sure that they are rigorous, they are realistic, and they can be achieved on the ground. So you have these two processes that have been supporting the post-2020 process, and they have worked hand in hand very well. And with the meeting we had in Geneva in March, where all the three processes took place in the same venue at the same time, this helped to closely link the issues, and also make sure that there's no inconsistency. Of course, more needs to be done, but the other two processes have now ended and they have handed over to COP. And but the post-2020 process has taken on board as much as possible the suggestions and the advice provided by these two bodies. For purposes of this, the event we are on today, I'll highlight aspects related to capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, knowledge management, and the clearinghouse mechanism, which are some of the decisions that the COP will be undertaking on the basis of the recommendation from SBI. The next slide. So briefly, just again to just give a few highlights with respect to capacity building and development and technical and scientific cooperation. The COP is expected to adopt a long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the post-2020 framework. And parties and stakeholders have been invited to use the guidance provided in this framework. So the recommendation is for COP to adopt this framework and for COP to invite parties and stakeholders to use the guidance. And this is where the effort you're undertaking right now will come in handy in terms of promoting this guidance and making sure that capacity development is done in a strategic and coherent manner. The other proposal is to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation in support of the post-2020, and a number of suggestions have been made, including the possibility of establishing institutional mechanisms to facilitate technical and scientific cooperation. There are options that have been on the table, and this include, for example, establishing a global technical and scientific cooperation support center, or establish regional support centers, or a hybrid of both. And the hub you are establishing could play a potential role in this regard. And if this decision is finally taken, I think we as the Secretariat will be very glad to explore ways of working with this hub to realize some of the aspirations of that will be in the context of the decision taken by COP. So there are core functions that have been laid out in the decision that much as CIVE after you may wish to look at and see if it fits and if it can be a component of the hub that you are launching today. The next slide. Yes, that should be my second last or last one. Yes. So this kind of gives details of one of the draft decisions, which I will not read. But again, as I said, there's a proposal to possibly establish a global technical and scientific cooperation support center, which would work very closely with the network of regional centers. And the next slide. All right, so in terms of the scenarios for technical and scientific cooperation, we are in the process of finalizing a review of the technical and scientific cooperation programs as were requested by SBI 3. We just received the report from the consultants last week. So this will be published perhaps within the next 2 weeks. And on the basis of this review, we hope that COP will be able to adopt a decision to establish, to adopt the proposals being made to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation. But in case it's not, there is a provision within the draft recommendation of an interim arrangement where the BioBridge initiative, which we are currently coordinating, could play a bridging gap until COP16 when this decision is adopted. But we are hopeful that this decision will be taken at this upcoming COP15 meeting. And the next slide. Yeah. So the other draft recommendation that you may want to interest yourself in is the recommendation 310, which is proposing recommending to COP to adopt a knowledge management component of the post-2020 framework. And this outlines a number of concrete actions grouped under 5 categories as part of the knowledge management process. So, and also the draft recommendation welcomes the knowledge, the proposed knowledge, global knowledge center for biodiversity. It welcomes the Panorama process facility initiative. It also welcomes the Amazon Regulatory Observatory and also the Data for Nature initiative. So the draft recommendation is already acknowledging the work that the Panorama is doing, and this I think will be most welcome in enabling us to go to the next step once the COP decision is taken to work together to support the parties. I think this should be my last slide. If you could go to the next one. Yes. So I think, as I said, we commend the Panorama initiative for already moving ahead before even COP15 adopts the post-2020 framework and the decisions I've just outlined. And we all need to proactively work together to facilitate and spearhead the implementation of the post-2020 framework and the relevant decisions. And just to say that we can't fail again, yet again, to achieve the targets that are going to be set out in this framework. We need to mobilize all the resources and other means of implementation to be able to achieve these ambitious targets. And the work that you are doing and many other partners planning, setting in motion, we believe that we'll be able this time not to miss the targets again and celebrate in 2030 that this time we made it. So just to thank you once again and to congratulate you on this launch, and we look forward to working very closely with you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Tamal. And it's really great to see the alignment and also the encouragement from the CBD Secretariat in support of both the regional observatories, but also the global level observatories. So that's really great. And I think the Regional Resource Hub stands ready to engage very proactively with the Secretariat as well as these discussions progress. To make sure that we are responding to the requirements of the parties as well as they finalize their discussions on what they would like to agree on. Having said that, thank you very much, Mr. Tamal, for that. I would now like to hand over to Dr. Nkurunziza, the Director General of the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, and for him to just give us a bit of a sense of RCMRD as a whole and its role in the region, and then we will move over to the more technical presentation by his colleague. Over to you, Dr. Nkurunziza. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christine. Greetings to all the participants in this webinar. I hope they can hear me clearly. It is our pleasure to participate in this webinar organized by BIOPAMA, but more importantly, to be part of the Regional Resource Hub that is housed or hosted by the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. So before my colleague comes in to say more about the hub, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, commonly referred to as RCMRD. This is an organization that is headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya, but has a membership of 20 contracting African countries that move all the way from Sudan to the Republic of South Africa. So beyond the contracting members, we have other non-contracting members that are in the process of fully joining the organization. So the setting up of the organization happened almost 50 years ago in 1975. And it was pushed forward by the Organization of African Unity at the time, together with the Economic Commission for Africa. And the reason really for setting up the organization resonates very well with what we are discussing here, because this was the early 70s and many of the African countries had just gotten independence. So with the OAU and ECA looking at how these young nations would be able to survive and meet the aspirations of their populations, they looked at natural resources as one of the critical pathways through which they can be able to achieve that. But it was important to, first of all, understand these resources, plan for them, manage them before you could be able to realize the potential that they offer to the young nations. So looking at the human resource capacity in the countries, it was decided that a number of centers of excellence should be set up across the continent. So one was set up here in Nairobi, and it began with 5 members at the time. It was Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Somalia, and Malawi. And then another was set up in West Africa to cover the West African region. And all these had really the same mandate, to see how they can be able to harness the power of Earth observations and geographic information systems to map or understand the natural resource base, plan for them, monitor their use or disuse, and then be able to also measure what comes from these resources. So in more clear terms, the mandate has remained the same over the past 47 years. And as I've said, the membership has grown over time to 20 countries. And the member countries own and manage the organization. The permanent secretaries for the ministries that are responsible for mapping or environment or surveying they constitute the board that actually determines our annual plans, appropriates our budget, and reviews our performance as management of the organization. At the top of the permanent secretaries or principal secretaries, we have ministers in the same ministries and the same domain. It varies from country to country, but the ministers offer the strategic direction for this institution. ECA remains a member of the governing council, and then the ministers meet every other 2 years. There is actually a meeting that is going to happen in a couple of weeks' time in Kampala that will bring together all these ministers, permanent secretaries, and heads of mapping agencies, basically to check whether we are meeting the aspirations of the organization and give us direction for the next 4 years. So the vision, in more precise terms, is to be a premier center of excellence in the provision of geoinformation and allied technologies for sustainable development in member states. So we are looking at geoinformation, geography, and other technologies that are associated, such as hubs and geoportals, in furthering the capacity of member states to manage their development. The mission that draws from that, our mission is to strengthen member states and other stakeholders' capacity through generation, application, dissemination of geoinformation and allied technologies for sustainable development. So it all revolves around geographies, it all revolves around resources and how they can be accurately measured, understood, planned for, and managed going forward. Now I come to this partnership that we've been privileged to be in with IUCN, that looks at one of the most critical natural resources in our region. If you look at our countries, protected areas are one of the key resources in these countries for various reasons, whether it's for economic reasons, whether it's for heritage and biodiversity, it's invaluable. So partnering with the IUCN to be able to create this regional resource hub that will collect and analyze information on the management and or protected areas is very critical for us. So with our capacities in Earth observations and then IT technologies of managing and curating data, we have partnered with IUCN, and we believe the information therein, as described by my colleague, should be available to decision makers, because that's where the rubber hits the road, because we have our technologies, but until decision makers are able to make it effective on the ground, then our technologies and our expertise does not really support the person on the ground. So we hope the resource hub can be widely used by policymakers, by researchers, and other people for purposes of managing the protected areas that are heritage in our region. So I thank you very much for this time. I hope I've saved a few minutes for Ngugi to go into the more detailed work.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Nkurunziza. I think that was a great overview just to place the RCMRD as the host institution within its role in the region. And it clearly has a very strong link to all the countries in the regions that even the RRH is serving. So I think it's a fantastic basis and there's very good relationships already existing there. And the regional resource hub focusing on protected areas is an add-on that is very well placed in the RCMRD, and we look forward as IUCN also to be continuing to collaborate with RCMRD on this work around global and local targets for biodiversity. So thank you so much for placing that context, making that framework. Then I'd like to invite Ngugi now to just present a bit more about what the Regional Resource Hub actually is and what it offers. And I think the host team will be sharing the slides on your behalf. So Ngugi, please feel free to just let them know when you need the slides to move. If you could switch your camera on, Ngugi, then that would be fantastic. And I'm handing over to you then.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christine. Maria, you can perhaps open the slides. I'm sorry, my camera has a bit of a technical issue, so I will just speak through the slides. If you can't locate it, Maria, I can just open it on my end. Okay, yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. As you have heard, my name is Ngugi Kimani. I work at Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. And my presentation will be a bit deeper on what the Regional Resource Hub is, what it does, and some of the activities that we can partner with as far as data sharing is concerned. Next slide, please. So the Regional Resource Hub is located at RCMRD, as you've heard. The photo you are seeing on the background is the complex of where we are located. The dot on the red dot on the left is where the Regional Resource Hub office is located. We are a mapping institution, so we always try to put a map in the work that we do. On the right inset is where the complex is located on the map. And that's where we have the staff of the Regional Resource Hub. Currently, we have 3 full-time staff, and before the end of the year, we shall have 2 additions, a communication officer, as well as a policy officer joining the team. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the Regional Resource Hub covers 24 countries in our region. Actually, this is like a complete match with the member states that RCMRD covers, from Sudan all the way to South Africa. And we are also fortunate that the 4 oceanic islands, that is Seychelles, Comoros, Madagascar, and Mauritius, are also part of the Regional Resource Hub. So that is really the coverage of the countries we cover. Next slide. So what is really the Regional Resource Hub? The RRH, as we normally call it, is really a knowledge hub that provides information for protected areas so that various decisions can be made and they can assist in the management and governance of these important resources. We know that there's quite a lot of pressure that the protected areas face. It could be from poaching, pollution, things like overfishing, deforestation, as well as population growth. So what the RRH does is try to compile and analyze the relevant data that can inform various policy makers on what are some of the interventions they can make when they want to make specific decisions pertaining these protected areas. Next slide, please. So as part of the work that we do, the RRH has very strong backing. We work closely with IUCN, as well as the Joint Research Center of the European Union Commission. Next slide. Among the key stakeholders that we have We have grouped them in 4 categories. At the innermost core of the bar graph, the graph that we have on the screen, is really the local community and the protected area managers that are really the target of the work that we do. So we work, the work that we do is targeting the local community as well as the protected area managers. We work very, very closely with the government institution as well as the non-governmental organization, including the academia. At the regional front, we work with the 4 regional economic communities, that is East Africa Community, Southern Africa Development Community, Indian Ocean Commission, as well as the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. And on the farmost outline, we have the regional partners that we work with very closely to provide the various services and tools for managing the protected areas. Next slide. Among the beneficiaries of the work that we do are the ministries of environment. These are government institutions that are charged with the responsibility of managing biodiversity conservation related work. We also have the protected areas agencies, as well as the local communities which are living in the protected areas. And we have also worked with the CBD's actors. And we hope that with this initiative that we are discussing about the post-2020 biodiversity targets, we'll get to have a more stronger relationship when it comes to the reporting that is required from the CBDs. Next slide. Yeah, so we have an online presence. The Regional Resource Hub has a website, so you can visit that website. It's esahub.rcmrd.org. So that's where all the information about what we do, the activities that we are doing, the data and information that we have is put, and you can access that information on that website. Next slide. Yeah, just to give you an idea of what we have in the website, we have detailed country information for all the 24 countries that we cover. Information like what are the protected areas, the coverage, both in marine and also the terrestrial. We have information like the global designation of the protected areas, the ones that are perhaps internationally recognized. We also have the priority areas of conservation which are listed, and some of the key species that are in that particular country. Next slide. So again, more detailed information about the countries that we cover is the data and information. And one can be able to see some of the global resources that are linked to the Regional Resource Hub, as well as the national data portals that each country has when it comes to managing of biodiversity and conservation related activities. So you can always visit the RRH to get more detailed information. I picked Namibia as an example, but we have 24 countries being represented in the RRH. Next slide. A strong part of what we do in the RRH is to do value addition. We develop various knowledge products, and these knowledge products can easily be used by various people who are not technically aware of GIS and mapping technology. So I will share with you a couple of some of these products that we have availed through the RRH. Next slide. Yeah, so one of the knowledge products that we have is the State of Protected Areas and Conserved Areas report. So this is a report that was done 2 years ago. So it contains detailed information for each particular country when it comes to protected and conserved areas. So you can visit the website and download it. And we shall be having actually from next year, the next version of the SOPACA report. And we will definitely be including most of the information for each country based on the updates that we'll have received. Next slide. Another product that we have is the dashboard that you are seeing on the screen. It shows the protected areas at the national level. So the example that we have on the screen is Madagascar. One can be able to tell how many protected areas they have. and what is really the coverage. Like in this case for Madagascar, most of the protected areas are classified as national parks, followed by locally managed marine areas. When you look at the pie chart, which has the governance type, you'll notice that most of the protected areas are managed by the local communities. And then below that, you'll be able to see the internationally recognized protected areas. So this information you can get for each and every country. Next slide. So a part of what we also do is to provide statistic information at the regional economic community level. I had indicated earlier we have 4 of them that we cover. So the slide that you are seeing on the screen shows the protected areas in the Southern Africa Development Community, and one can easily tell which country has the highest number of protected areas. In this case, it's South Africa. But when it comes to the coverage, Tanzania is the one that is leading in terms of the protected areas that have been mapped and have already been updated in the World Database of Protected Areas. Next slide. So behind the dashboard that you are seeing, we have a tool called the Regional Information System. It's really the engine that contains the data and the information. The information is contained at the regional level, country level, as well as the site-specific level. So these are tools that anyone can use. You can get data. Like, for example, if you need data for monitoring of elephants, illegal poaching, and that kind of data, you can be able to get it in this particular product called the Regional Information System. Next slide. Yeah, so what really can the RRH do to the CBD actors? So we can provide about 5 or 6 things. One, we have assessment tools that can be used for managing the effectiveness of our protected areas, as well as the governance and equity. We also provide the baseline data to support decision-making. We are also going to be developing the SOPACA report, that is the state of protected and conserved areas in 2023. We also do a lot of capacity building. Early this year, we did 2 trainings, one targeting the Eastern African countries and another one targeting the Southern African countries, on issues to do with mapping, data collections, and conducting the assessments. We also provide data at a very, very synthesized form to inform various policymakers at the 3 levels that I talked about. And we do hope that in any policy and legislation activities, we can always participate in this. And that's why we are this year going to recruit a policy officer to really support the RRH in this particular aspect. Next slide. So how does the data flow in the RRH? We have various data that we receive from government agencies, from other international recognized organizations, as well as data that we get from different entities. This information, once it comes to the RRH, it is verified, it's cleaned, and it's filtered, and then it's converted to an output, like the dashboard that you saw earlier in the screen. We develop the reports and come up with the country profiles. Then this information can later be used by the various users, from protected area managers, different partners, as well as the national government agencies. Next slide. So in conclusion, we can say that the RRH is really honored to partner with BIOPAMA. And the idea here is to improve the long-term conservation and sustainable use of the natural resources by the various things that we are doing. It could be either capacity development, providing data and information, providing filtering the gaps that we have already identified that needs to be filled up, analyzing this information, producing the knowledge products so that effective decisions can be made as far as protected areas and conserved areas is concerned. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ngugi. So hopefully that gave you a pretty good idea of what the Regional Resource Hub offers, and in particular also offers in relation to the post-2020 global biodiversity targets and the reporting or monitoring against these global targets. And maybe just to sort of also bring some of that together, I would like to hand over to Trevor now to just end the presentation segment of this webinar. And maybe just a quick reminder that we have now enabled the chat as well. But I see that there are some questions in the Q&A. Please feel free to use either of those forums to just put your questions in. Anything that's come up for you while you were listening to Ngugi's presentation or any of the previous presentations, or while Trevor is talking, feel free. We will pick those up after Trevor's presentation. Over to you, Trevor. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Christine, and good afternoon, good morning to everybody. So my job is to zoom in a little bit on making the link between what we've just been hearing about and what Eri Tamale was talking about in terms of contributing towards the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So I'll try and do that as soon as I can. I know we're a little bit behind time, but I'll try and catch up a little bit too. So we know that this negotiation process is going on. And there you can see the co-chairs of the open-ended working group in Nairobi. But also on this slide, I'm just giving you the impression that there's a very, very strong civil society component, people from not only the Africa region, but all around the world, who basically saying that we need to get rid of those brackets because those are the things that are inhibiting us moving forward with a proper program of conserving biodiversity, especially in protected and conserved areas. So although Eri didn't want to put the text on the screen, I'm doing that today because this is the original text, not the text that is being really negotiated at the moment, just so that you can see that in this draft target 2 that will replace the Aichi target 11, that there are a whole bunch of issues around the extent in land, sea, and inland waters, the issue of the relationship between biodiversity and people. And then in what I've put in red here are really things that have come back from Aichi Target 11, that there is conservation through effectively and equitably managed and governed, ecologically represented and well-connected systems of protected areas and OECMs. And of course, also integrated into the wider landscapes and seascapes. So I'm going to just break that down a little bit more, just so that we are feeling comfortable with what we're trying to do with the regional observatories. And starting off with really a big question, which is what counts? So there's all that issue about 30 by 30 and what it should include. And these are some of the things that should count. First of all, obviously, we're talking about all of the protected and conserved areas of the world, including in the Eastern and Southern Africa region. And what we're talking about is coverage to some extent. The 30% means the whole 30% of the whole world's ocean, 30% of the whole world's terrestrial, and 30% of the whole world's inland waters ecosystem should be conserved. And we are around, less than 15% terrestrial and about 17% marine in areas within national jurisdiction. But 30% is not really enough. It's not about the size. It really isn't, because if you all know that it's really about what's going on there. So if you look at the different parts of the indicators, they're about which areas are important for making sure that biodiversity and ecosystem services are actually conserved in the long term. How do we represent all the variety of nature? How do we make sure that it's connected and that it's designed in an adequate way? So there's very important issue around what makes an effective system. And of course, there are many tools that you know about key biodiversity areas, assessment tools, information that is contained in the Regional Resource Hub that's of vital significance to being able to answer some of these questions. So here's one of the first links. Of course, also, if you go to look at the analytical tools that Ngugi was mentioning, to be able to work out whether what we have is ecologically representative. It requires overlay analysis, all of which can be done. And also one can measure connectivity using some of the new indicators and looking at how these areas actually serve as ecological networks. And Africa and this particular region has some incredibly good examples to offer the world as to how to achieve connectedness. And of course, a very closely associated issue with connectivity is restoration. How do you put back areas that have been disconnected? How do you fix damaged ecosystems? And so there's much to be involved in this target. So it's not just about 30%. It's got to be the right 30%, and it's got to be in the right shape. So the second big question that we all have to talk about is who counts, because biodiversity doesn't conserve itself. And as you all know, biodiversity is in the hands not only of governments, but we heard about locally managed marine areas in Madagascar. We heard about privately conserved areas. We hear about the areas and territories of indigenous peoples. And these are all the actors who count. So we need to know all about the diversity and quality of the governance. Who has the decision-making power? It's not only governments, it's also communities. And we also have to make sure, Christine used the word fair and equitable, meaning that this is just, that it is in accordance with people's rights, in accordance with equitable procedures. When people's rights are not respected, and what kind of mechanism is there for making sure that their rights can be addressed or restored. And also we need to look at about the distribution of costs and benefits. So in those little words inside the target, people get very caught up by the 30%. But when you add the quality measures that I'm talking about now, we really do have to be able to inform decision makers about these aspects too. So, having an understanding of what are other effective area-based conservation measures, who can put these in place, who can recognize them, who will report them. These are very critical issues that this community that is with us today is really thinking about. So I've touched on some of the issues around the diversity and the quality of governance and equity, but I wanted to just flag that in the latest parts of the negotiation, there's a huge emphasis on the participation and the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples and local communities, and a call for this target to call this out in particular. So we cannot have 30% that is somehow, just going to extend some of the injustices of the past. We've got to have a 30% that is just and equitable and achieves the conservation of nature, involving all the right actors. So the things that matter for effective systems are that they've got to be planned properly, they've got to be equitably governed, they've got to be effectively managed, and they've got to achieve their outcomes. And these are the kinds of information that are inside the regional resource hub, as well as systems like the IUCN Green List, which sets a standard and says, this is the bar, this is what you have to achieve if you want to be good in terms of all these things. And many of you mentioned the fact that we also have to build capacity. So it's not going to happen by accident. Every one of us, every practitioner has got to be able to know all those different technologies, tools, and ways of measuring and conserving nature into the future. So I'll come down, because we don't have a lot of time today. There's lots of information, and you can go and look up some of the things I'm talking about, or ask questions and we can follow up. But I just wanted to sort of go to this main point, is that we have a regional resource hub, and it's one of the regional observatories that is supporting decision-making in the global biodiversity framework. You know that the BIOPAMA program is also operating in West and Central Africa. So again, there's regional observatories in those regions. There's also a regional observatory in the Pacific, another one in the Caribbean. And you heard Eri talking about one in the Amazon, which is not a BIOPAMA supported one. but we all collectively together really have to position the regional observatories as being able to serve up the information that I've just been talking about for better decision making. So this is, as we say, the expression that we say is, this is where the rubber hits the road. We can't just build information systems. We've got to connect those information systems to the decision makers. And that's the process that all of you can help with as we look at the Regional Resource Hub and where it goes next. Because we want the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity to recognize your efforts as well, the Regional Resource Hub, as being essential parts of delivering information. So what I'm going to do now is just going to come back to a couple of points. You've mentioned the fact that you have publications and tools and capacity building programs that can help serve that. So that's another aspect of what you're doing. Let's just go back to the decision that Erie, he jumped past it quite fast, but I just want to draw your attention to it. Is first of all, there is this idea, and as you can see, there are brackets all over this text too, that there should be a global technical and scientific cooperation center. And you saw in the draft decision that Erie presented that the parties would welcome that, a global center. But the whole idea is that this should also draw lessons from and maximize synergies with other technology transfer initiatives and mechanisms, including, and this is where you'll see the text on BIOPAMA, so that the BIOPAMA regional observatories and reference information systems, so that the final paragraph, that the core functions of the Global Support Center and the regional support centers and organizations will be carried out in coordination with the Secretariat and in line with the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We're going to be fluent in this language by the time we're finished with this process. But you can see how important the work is that you're doing to make this link, that the RRH will support this process of decision-making along with other regional observatories and information systems. But at the same time, none of that makes any sense if you don't have the right information. So we absolutely need to make sure that the regional observatory, that the RRH has all of the information, like I was setting out a little earlier, and that we are capable of serving that up in a way that is useful to stakeholders. So that's the key. So I want to just come to basically the last slide of my presentation, which is that we've, just to reiterate that point, we've got to make sure that the regional observatory, including the RRH, has all of the relevant information, or at least can point to where you can find that information. So it's critical that we, as that target gets elaborated and agreed, that we quickly jump on it and say, you want to answer that question? Here, we have that information. We need to make sure that the national focal points for the CBD actually are aware of the RRH and the use of the information. So that's one of the reasons for having this webinar, and maybe we'll need more on specific topics. We also need to make sure that the national delegations actually call for ambitious targets and those quality measures. It's coming up in December, and so between now and December, we can showcase to national delegations what we can help them with. And then ultimately, this gives a long-term role for the regional reference information systems and the regional observatory institutions, so, and the host institutions. So we should make sure that we are able to follow that path, to track and measure performance on whatever is agreed. And it won't only be about protected and conserved areas, it's a wider set of issues. You heard 22, maybe 23 targets, and to continue to build capacity to implement the key actions required. So I think, to just as a last point, that our ambition here is to enhance the role of the regional observatories and their host institutions as those regional centers. That's not yet agreed. We've got to make that happen, and you're all key to doing that. So thanks to Christine, and thanks to everybody for the chance to open that up.
Great. Thank you very much, Trevor, also for your presentation. So that brings us to the end of the presentations. Thank you all for sticking with us. I know it was a lot of information that we shared with you, the various speakers, but we hope that it was very useful, and we'd like to just open the floor now to questions. And I'd like to encourage you to put your questions either in the Q&A or in the chat. Perhaps in the chat, it seems to be that's more active, so maybe the chat is easier. If you do have questions, I've picked up a few, and I would like to ask, if I may, that the panelists can switch their cameras on again. So I would just like to then maybe just take some of the questions and discuss those with the presenters. If I may, I'll maybe start with Mr. Tamal, just around maybe also Trevor's point just now. He also commented in the chat about the fact that there was already an Amazon observatory that is linked somewhat into the CBD. And so the question really is, the RRH and all the other observatories that Trevor just mentioned are all looking to support this process of monitoring and reporting against targets, and supporting countries really to understand where they are in achieving those targets. Is there anything, any advice that you want to also share with the observatory organizations of how they can approach that better? Is there anything we might have learned from the Amazon one or similar that you want to maybe just share with us how we can proceed with that?
Thanks, Christine. Indeed, as Trevor said, to be very critical that these different observatories and different information systems out there that are working and to supporting the post-2020 collaborate and share experiences. I think at the CBD Secretariat, we are looking at a possibility of being able to provide that convening role where we can bring together the different players and give them a platform to share these experiences, but also to look for synergies and learning from each other, because all these are supporting parties and other stakeholders to achieve the targets that are going to be adopted. So I think there's a lot to benefit from the collaboration than they would lose. And actually, I don't think there's any loss. And there's a big win-win and gain-gain. So, but we will look into establishing that mechanism that would allow these observatories to coordinate and collaborate and share experiences once the decision is adopted. Thank you. But I think it's very critical that these centers and observatories work very closely.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Mr. Tamal. I also think that certainly for our region, and I know that in the BIOPAMA supported observatories, there's also a lot of effort being made by the host institutions to build the relationships with the parties individually as well as then through the Secretariat. So I think that will be very welcome to then have the Secretariat support a networking of the host organizations as well, and allow that information exchange on how we can best support the reporting against the targets as well. Excellent. So then we had another question, another two questions, in fact, from Djibouti around marine areas in particular. They're relatively specific, so I'm going to generalize them slightly to maybe just give us all more a sense of how the Regional Resource Hub can help with some of these topics. So the one question was more related to policy. So I'm going to ask maybe Dr. Nkurunziza to comment a little bit on this. And the question really is, in terms of strengthening policies or ensuring that the right kind of policies are in place, what role do you think institutions like the regional observatories or the RCMRD with all its information management, what role do they play in terms of informing policy? and the development of relevant policy.
Oh, thank you very much, Christine. And thank you, the person from Djibouti who asked the question. As I said in my brief remarks, I mean, whatever we are doing is not going to be of value until it impacts what is happening on the ground. And one sure way is to connect with those who make the decisions that influence what happens on the ground. So as RSMLD, together with our partners within the BIOPAMA framework, is we're trying to make sure people are aware that this resource is there first and foremost, the capabilities it has. So we want to use all the fora and avenues we have for meeting decision makers to be able to communicate how we can assist them actually. So as I indicated earlier, we, for example, have this forum of ministers. So it's up to us to find the best way to package an effective message. I know many of them are the same people who will be pursuing the discussions around the COP, because many of them are actually telling us they'll be coming to the meeting all the way from COP. So we need to really make sure that we make them know that we have this resource, we can help them, we can break down the complex issues for them to be able to make contributions on the ground. So it's really awareness, sensitization, and being able to also train. I think the capacity building element is also critical, because I think most of these things are there hidden in a portal. Until you break down through training of some of the senior government officials to see how they can be able to get out key messages they can feed through the hierarchy, then we can be able to really make a difference through these resource hubs. And I thank also Tamari for really the connecting of hubs. I think it would be very important to see what others are doing, what mechanisms that they are using that you can learn from. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Nkurunziza. And linked to that, there was a second question from Djibouti as well around monitoring and also using satellite imagery to really get a sense of what some of these marine systems look like. And I wanted to throw this to Ngugi, if I may, in terms of just sort of speaking perhaps at the more technical level of the kinds of products that the RRH is able to provide that would link to what Dr. Nkurunziza has just said, which is feeding into the policy realm. So maybe you, Ngugi, you can just tell us a little bit more again about, as an example, monitoring of marine ecosystems. What are the kinds of things that the RRH can assist countries with in terms of monitoring of ecosystems?
Yep. Thank you, Christine, for the question, and the gentleman from Djibouti. Yeah, so what the RRH can provide in monitoring of resources, it could be either through satellite imagery, which is the most effective and the easiest of them all. We have previously done not through BIOPAMA but a different program where we mapped all the mangroves along the Indian Ocean, coastal Indian Ocean region. So this is information that is actually even available in the regional resource hub. And what we can also provide for the marine, for Djibouti, is to share experiences on how the locally managed marine areas are being used in different countries, and how some of the successes that have been identified by the various actors who are managing these resources. So other than just the mapping, but also to provide lessons learned from the various locally managed marine areas that are common in the coastal areas. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ngugi. And that actually has just reminded me, it links back to another thing Mr. Tamal was talking about, which is the Panorama Solutions, which is also a resource that is linked very closely into the regional observatories and essentially highlights good examples, best practice, and from the ground examples of how success stories have, or how success has been achieved in terms of biodiversity conservation. Well, biodiversity conservation being one example. Panorama is a bit wider than that, but for us, that is the key focus. And so linking to what Ngugi says, the Regional Resource Hub also provides that resource, which is these examples of really good practice and what is possible on the ground in our region. So then I wanted to just, I don't see any further questions in the chat. Just quickly checking if I missed anything. I hope not. If you do have any other questions, please do feel free to still put them into the chat. But otherwise, I wanted to just go back to you, Trevor, to see if there was anything else sort of after the specific questions now that you wanted to raise in terms of how we can really ensure that these regional observatories are meeting the needs in the individual regions and helping the countries to report better. Yeah,
I think you can see that there's sort of the kind of three big things here. There's the regional observatory itself, the regional resource hub, and the information that it contains. And on the one hand, it's got to speak to the countries. And I know that all of you have spent a lot of time with many webinars and processes to make sure that the connection is there. Of course, information is flowing from the countries into the regional resource hub also, but the regional resource hub has analytical capabilities, can combine that information with other information and serve those needs. So I think that's a critical, so building is the central piece, serving the needs of the stakeholders is a critical piece. And then the part that is still a little bit of a mystery to me is how do we get that in front of the main decision makers? It's not just users, managers in the field and communities and so on, but how does this get across the desks of the ministries of environment, the ministries of natural resources that have decision-making power in these countries? And how do we make sure that the delegates that go to these international conferences are aware of this? Is that maybe people have got some advice about what we can do to make the linkages? That's the part that seems so tricky. I know that many countries are having preparatory meetings, roundtables on what their positions are going to be leading into the meetings in Canada in December. But how do we get not a seat at that table, but how do we make sure the people at that table are fully aware of what this great work that you're all doing? That to me is the key question, and I'm hoping others. I mean, maybe even Eri, you might have. How do we do it from the CBD side? Can we? We're really in. It's probably the big implementation problem of the world, how to bring the people together.
Thanks, Trevor. Yeah, well, Eri, do you want to maybe respond to that? I see you have your hand up anyway, so please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's the critical part, and there's a missing link actually, because it's not like there's no data. There's been a lot of data and information hosted by different institutions in their databases. Most of that has not made it to the policymakers and the planners, unfortunately. And when we're developing the knowledge management component, we try to emphasize that aspect. For us, is still the major missing link. Because even the little we have, of course, we still need to collect more and understand more. But even the little that is there, it needs to be maximized and utilized to support planning, to support decision making, to support monitoring, and being able to support the development of the NBSAPs. And in the component, it's the knowledge management component, we put some actions that could help, but we need the actors like you to help us move to that and get the policymakers to appreciate this and also reach out and engage. And because we don't know what their needs are until they've communicated what their needs are, what decision they need to make, and tell them, oh, actually that there's data that can support your decision, and it's here and it's here. And before we know, it's difficult. So it's a two-way process. The policymakers need to reach out, but also we need to to engage them and tell them what we have. And the IP-based process, I think, in a way, is trying to help with that, but we're still not there yet. We're still not there yet. We need to do more, but for me, that's still the major missing link, and we need to put equal emphasis. Just as we need to put emphasis on more knowledge generation, we need to put emphasis on the use, but also the audit of what we have and being able to see, okay, what more do we need to have? What do we need to modify in order to support the overall objective? So the reason why I put up my hand was I had a question to the hub, and I know the emphasis is so much on the protected areas and all these other associated areas, but the GBF has other targets that are all biodiversity. One of them is ecosystem restoration. Some of the ecosystems might not be protected areas as such. So the question is there flexibility that this hub and other hubs could be looking at expanding perhaps and covering those other aspects, so that we know there are hubs for monitoring biodiversity in general, and of course with the emphasis on protected areas, but so that then we can work with the parties and say, look, you have a center in the region already that hosts quite a significant amount of data and information, not on protected areas, but also on other aspects, and restoration in particular. And I'm sorry to single out this, but this is going to be a major key aspect of the effort going to the 2030. The process of how the restoration efforts are going to be monitored and tracked, and having that data feeding back to the parties is very critical. And I don't know, I know there are a few institutions that are perhaps going to be doing that, but the challenge with the parties have is whether they have to hop from one institution to another, to collect different, it makes it very, and this is feedback we've been receiving, that it's very difficult to be able to, and the quality assurance of the different players is different. So how can we say, okay, now this hub, and then when it comes to restoration, I go to this other institution. When it comes to invasives, I go to another one. You know, so it really becomes difficult, and that they need a place where they can say, if I need the information, I need data to help me support, this is where I go, and I can be able to get that data. So that's the part that we need to see how we can, a hub like yours could try to address those other aspects, so that we have one central place where we can direct parties to go. Thank you.
Trevor, did you want to respond directly to that?
Yeah, I can respond, but I'm going to sort of also leave the door open for Dr. Emmanuel to talk from a RRH point of view. But you're absolutely right, Iri. The regional observatories do not only focus on protected and conserved area information. They're focusing on all information that's required for decision making, and we use the protected and conserved area information deliberately through BIOPAMA to basically be able to showcase and demonstrate when you have a good target that you can actually relate directly to that target. And we're hoping that there'll be many more quantitative targets, including for restoration, that also can have that link. And I just wanted to mention, because I also manage a program in IUCN on restoration, on forest and grassland restoration, that there are also other integrators, if you like, of restoration information, including the restoration barometer, because the Bonn Challenge in the decade of restoration has been pulling together information from not only countries, but also other organizations on their commitments to restore and tracking progress. But I would assume, and I'll hand the floor to the regional observatory, that the RRH is a go-to center that can also be serving up that same information. So we need to make these the go-to place You go to the regional resource hub, they'll find you, the linkages to the other info. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Trevor. Dr. Nkurunziza and Ngugi, would you like to respond as well to that? Please go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I think I'll just make a quick comment and then we can take it from there. Mm-hmm. I mean, the issue that Eri raises on having one-stop center for this data and information is very critical. Where from the RCMRD point of view, we have many other sister portals, just like Trevor has just mentioned. And many of them now we're trying to integrate them so that most of this information that is coming from other programs, whether it's the Forest Observatory or our other information that we collect from different portals, are also accessible through the Regional Resource Hub. But as an institution, we are a broad-based geospatial data institution, which collects data on almost every facet of human life. So the key thing is to see how much of this can actually be integrated in the Regional Resource Hub, so that is the main area to go to when you're looking for this information. Ngugi?
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps I'll share two examples of what the Regional Resource Hub is doing by collaborating with the regional economic communities. So we have the East Africa community that has identified ecosystems that they would want us to support them in mapping and monitoring them. So this is not something just that focuses on protected areas, but it's a little bit beyond that. Another example is with the SADC, with the Southern Africa Development Community. We are actually hosting for them the transboundary Consortia area network. That is the TFCA. What we do, we actually provide the hosting and some value addition to the products that they have, but everything that they do, they manage them, they manage themselves very well. They have a very good network that already knows what they do. So what the RRH is just to provide a linkage and to provide this place where knowledge products that have been developed from the TFCA portal can be channeled through the RRH. So in most cases, you'll find that about 30% of the information we have in the RRH comes from third-party programs and projects that are doing different things, but all related with biodiversity and conservation work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. And I'm afraid our time is up. So, but thank you. That was a really useful discussion also, just to highlight some of these linkages and the value that the Regional Resource Hub can provide. So I hope, thank you again to all our presenters and panelists here. Thank you very much for making the time to be with us this afternoon. It really was very useful to get that overall overview and also the linkages to other institutions, and in particular how all of this relates to the current discussions around the new targets and how the RRH can then support that going forward. I wanted to also thank all of the participants that joined us today. I hope this was useful for you as well. We have recorded this and we will also be sharing it, if you like, with you, but also with the CBD focal points, many of whom were not able to join us today due to other commitments, which Eri will know about as well. So we really do hope that the Regional Resource Hub in particular, but also the other regional observatories under BIOPAMA, can make a substantive contribution to the CBT, the monitoring of the global targets. And with that, I would like to close this webinar today and thank you all very much for being here. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe one last thing, I just see in the chat, we've just posted a link to a brochure that we put together. So that essentially gives you a very good summary of a lot of what was said about the Regional Resource Hub and how it can contribute to the post-2020 targets. So please do go and have a look. We will also send that to all of you in the email, in the follow-up email with the recording. And please share it widely with your colleagues. If you're telling them about the Regional Resource Hub, feel free to share that. And mostly, I want to encourage all of you to remain engaged with us in the Resource Hub. You've now met Ngugi, and myself, who are sort of the technical support for this as well. Please do engage with us and get hold of us, talk to us. We are really here to support the region, and we want to do that as best we can. So yes, please get hold of us. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Christine, bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.